questions of the media since we couldn't do it remotely today. And I wanted to first say that I've been in law enforcement for a long time. I have obviously worked as a federal prosecutor with law enforcement. In my federal positions, at DEA and Homeland Security, I worked with law enforcement, and there's not a public official that has more respect for law enforcement than I do, and I'm very proud that the state police particularly has been available and has worked very long hours, and I want to express my appreciation to them. But I also want to say that the death of George Floyd is such a landmark site in America, and it's troubling to anybody who appreciates law enforcement and their role in public safety. And to see the death in such a way when George Floyd is crying out, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe," you understand the outrage that the American people feel, the outrage that I feel, the disappointment that we have in law enforcement officers that are sworn to uphold the law, and yet they cross every line and they abuse the system. They don't honor the system. They don't honor the rule of law and justice. And so with that, I understand the outrage, the disappointment, the fear, and the distrust that is prevalent in a community in African Americans that calls them to come out and to demonstrate and to protest. I respect that. I understand it. I identify with it. And everything that we do should recognize that personal feeling that they have and fear that they want to call out and to demonstrate and to cry for justice. And I recognize that, and I support that. During this time, it is my job as governor to make sure that those that want to express themselves as demonstrators, as protesters that are peaceful, that they are protected and that they have the right to exercise the First Amendment privileges and rights, and I support that, and I want to make sure that we, through our law enforcement efforts, protect them. Secondly, it is my job to assure that we do not have destruction of property and violence that accompanies those protests that are legitimate. And so I've got a couple different roles here and responsibilities. Two days ago, and let me emphasize this, 2 days ago, I activated the National Guard. 2 days ago, on Saturday night, I activated the Arkansas National Guard. General Penn is here. He knows that on that night, I asked them to stay positioned in Camp Robinson because this was a peaceful protest. We wanted to make sure that what happened here or what happened across the country didn't happen here, and so they were positioned in Camp Robinson on Saturday night. It was not until we saw the damage to the Capitol Saturday night, and the state police responded very quickly to that, and got it under control and dispersed the crowd, that we realized that we needed to have the continued support of the Arkansas National Guard. And so on Sunday night, last night, they were closer. And toward the end of the evening, late at night, whenever there was violence that was being conducted and destruction of property, both the state police and the National Guard responded to protect those innocent protesters, but also to dispel those that are wanting to do violence and damage to property. And so we are going to continue to utilize the National Guard that I've activated in that backup capacity to support the rule of law and the protection of property. Today, the mayor indicated that we're going to have a curfew that he announced here in Little Rock. I support that. I've been in regular communication with the mayor, and I think that will be helpful as a tool because the peaceful protest can happen in that time of day up till 10 p.m. After that, it gives us an opportunity to say it's time to go home, and the opportunity to protest will be recognized and carry out prior to that time. Tonight, I want to make sure that we're there to support the peaceful protest that has been conducted, that I've witnessed, that we've all witnessed, and to make sure that they are protected. And that's the first responsibility of the state police, working with the Little Rock Police Department and the Arkansas National Guard. But let's not let violence and destruction of property, which we've all witnessed, undermine the message that is so important that is being conveyed by the demonstrators, that they want to convey their heartfelt emotions about. And let me be clear that I will not tolerate acts of violence or destruction of property that is inconsistent with a peaceful protest and unnecessary, undermines that message, but primarily it just simply is not Arkansas, and it's not what we are about, and we expect to have everyone protected, and that we don't have the same type of looting and violence and acts of destruction that we've seen in other states, but we've also regretfully seen it in isolated incidences in Arkansas. And so with that statement, I'll be happy to take any questions. Right.
Governor, Senator Cotton has called for, raised the possibility of bringing in the 101st Airborne, the 82nd Air, the 1st Mountain, the 1st Cavalry, the 3rd Infantry, quote, whatever it takes to restore order. From your perspective, what kind of impact would it have if we brought American troops into American cities to face off in this environment?
Well, I take the President's comments first, and I was on the telephone call and listened to the President's comments today, that he's looking at the national landscape and looking at the cities that have really been disrupted with violence to a large scale that has not been under control. And so I'll leave that to him and Senator Cotton as to how the Insurrection Act might apply. I worry about Arkansas, and in terms of Arkansas, this I look at as a civilian law enforcement responsibility with the backup of the Arkansas National Guard that is on state status, and we are intent on making sure that destruction and violence does not occur here, and we believe that we can handle that with the resources that we have and with the intent of our protesters to be peaceful, which is 90% of those that are out there are demonstrating in that fashion. So I don't see that as having application to Arkansas. I don't see that it being necessary for Arkansas, and it's not something that we need.
What will happen if people are out past the curfew tonight after 10 o'clock? What's going to happen? What kind of rules will be enforced?
Well, first, the responsibility is first with the Little Rock Police Department and the city. And, you know, there's cities all across Arkansas, and we had demonstrations in Conway. We might have one in Bentonville, Jonesboro, West Memphis. And so it's local law enforcement that has the first responsibility to enforce a local ordinance or a curfew. We're there to back up the Little Rock Police Department as requested. We are there to protect the Arkansas Capitol, and we don't want the flag taken down either, by the way. And so we're there to protect the Capitol. We're there to make sure that's not defaced, and then to respond as needed to the Little Rock Police Department. So they would be the first responsibility. If they need any assistance, then we're there to back them up.
Sir, many of the President's tweets and his other comments in the past 2-3 days have been termed, a word frequently used as incendiary. How would you characterize them?
You know, I'll let the President explain his tweets and other people characterize it. I just look at Arkansas and what we need to be doing, and I try to be careful in my comments. I want them to be supportive of the rightful exercise of outrage by the demonstrators. That's just important to emphasize. And the President has done that. He should do it again and again, because that's we've got to get through this as a nation, and we've got to resist the division and somehow bring a more unified spirit, and it starts with communication and dialogue. So the President's very concerned, obviously, about the rule of law in our nation and how we're looking across the globe, but also the destruction of personal property. So he made his comment. I just want my comments to be balanced, and I want them to be fair, but supportive of both the rule of law and the right to protest. Yes.
Governor, there are videos of police firing at protesters from short range that are kneeling on the ground, of tear gassing protesters who are peacefully sitting on the steps. Does that come across as excessive or troubling to you?
Well, anytime there's an order to disperse a crowd, there are public announcements made. We must disperse. We must disperse, and that they've engaged because we've seen acts of violence or looting or break-ins or destruction of property, and so we want to dispel a crowd. You do it first by public announcement, and so if they're not dispersing, then there is a sequence of responses that are less than lethal or non-lethal that the state police can take. And I'm going to ask Colonel Bryant if you could come and address that question as well.
Thank you, Governor. What we try to do in these instances is voluntary compliance. Each time, if we make the decision to disperse a crowd, it's usually based on what the governor talked about: violent acts, felony criminal mischief, assault on officers by throwing bricks, rocks, things like that, where it's out of hand. If you don't address it, it tends to escalate. And what we see with large crowds, it's easier to use these devices, CS gas, irritant gas, pepper ball guns, which is equivalent to a paintball gun, instead of having to go hands-on with these people. Our goal is to get them to safely disperse. And again, we give them usually 5 to 8 warnings and have time in between those warnings. We give them every opportunity to disperse. So we want to do it the best way possible, protect the citizens and protect our state. As the governor said, I've been the director here about 5.5 years. We've had many protests, and we're here to protect the protesters. The rule of law is very important. I've known the governor a long time with his law enforcement background. Without rule of law, we have chaos. And as law enforcement officers, state troopers, we take an oath to enforce the laws of Arkansas and the Constitution of the United States. So we will protect our protesters, but we have to take action if we see criminal behavior and violent acts, felony criminal mischiefs, and that. We owe it to our citizens here in the state to protect them.
What was the specific reason that you went in last night and decided to disperse that group?
At first, again, they were there all day. We were there to protect them and enforce those rights. And then we first started seeing them setting fires. They were pouring some type of flammable liquid and lighting it on the streets. As we continued to watch, there at the 501 building, we observed a burglary. They broke the glass out, went into the building, coming out with papers. Some surveillance thought that they might be setting a fire there, and that's when we decided to make the decision to move. Again, the building, the 501 building, that's the second night in a row it's been vandalized. But again, we have to address those issues. That's a felony crime. We cannot, as law enforcement officers, turn our head to that.
A police report by the Little Rock Police Department said that when officers arrived, they found no evidence of arson at the 501 building.
Well, again, that's just what we're saying, surveillance. But again, it's burglary. They entered that building, come out with papers. I think another law office next door to that, or in the immediate area, than the old AT&T building was vandalized. And then Saturday, kind of the same thing, issues that came up. I think it's very important to know that it might seem peaceful to block our interstate highways, but the issues we have, especially here with 630, first and foremost is the protesters. They get out on the interstate and then get run over. The second is, if you're a motorist, you could hit them. And as in all accidents, if the interstates come to a complete halt, what we worry about is secondary collisions. What I mean by that, if that traffic stop and you used to have cars driving the speed limit 65 miles an hour and come up on them, we have a lot of secondary collisions. which is really dangerous. And then 6:30, if you think about it, they block both lanes, east and westbound lanes, and that is the center core of medical help here in Arkansas. You have Children's Hospital, Baptist, UAMS, and when those roads are blocked, people need emergency treatment. They can't get to those hospitals.
Governor, when the mayor announced his curfew today, he said in his statement that professional out-of-state antagonists posing as protesters intend to be destructive during future protests and strategically instigate acts of violence. Who do you think the violent protesters are?
Well, I think they're there, first of all. I do believe we have people from out of state that have been identified through intelligence and otherwise that indicate they are here to agitate, they're here to cause problems and to disrupt. I've asked about the arrests that have been made because we've had arrests here in Little Rock, we've had arrests made in Conway and other places, and there's Arkansans being arrested as well. And so I think you have three categories. The largest category are those legitimate, peaceful protesters that want to express themselves in the right way. That's the largest group that we're talking about. We can't lose our focus on that. But then you also have some Arkansans that taken advantage of the situation to break into the Target store with the intent to loot it or just to wreak havoc in different stores. And law enforcement done an incredible job of anticipating, knowing, and preventing some of that. Not 100% successful, but they've really, really done a good job. Then you have the third category, which are those out of state that come in that want to raise this to a level of insurrection and lawlessness. And so we've got to protect the first majority group of legitimate protesters and then also deal with those other two categories that I itemized. Let me...
Group? Is it an organized group? Is it a group of white supremacists? Is it a group of anti-fascists? I mean, who is it? Can you identify who it is?
No, I'm not. Well, I want to get more intelligence. I want to get more information before we start identifying those groups. So I'm not going to go down that path. In looking at some of them, I could make some judgments, but I'm not going to yet publicly. So we'll continue to look at that information. Let me interrupt. We'll take some more questions, but I failed to recognize Deshaun Scarborough with the Martin Luther King Commission, who's been a good counselor of mine as well. Deshaun, could you come up and make a brief comment as to your perspective on this?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Governor. And thank you for your continuous belief in the Arkansas Martin Luther King Commission and support. We've got some difficult days ahead. These are the words that echoed of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. more than 50 years ago. They still ring true today as our world, our nation, are in the midst of a global pandemic and experiencing insurmountable loss of life. This is not only an African-American problem, but a human problem. You know, violence in our society has remained constant. And during Dr. King's time, violence played out on television, black and white TVs, as many of you remember. But in our generation, it plays on social media, often in real time, reaffecting old wounds. It causes us to question our positions as we ponder the state of our country, race relations, and the progress that we've made in the generation of 50 years ago since the death of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We acknowledge that our nation is hurting right now because of the death of George Floyd. The loss of human life is difficult to deal with in any situation. These painful images, played and looped on every news station throughout the world, will never be erased from our consciousness. We're all concerned and hurt, and we all should be concerned. As a father and a black man, I have to be vulnerable and say that this hurts. It hurts me, and it hurts my community. The Arkansas Martin Luther King Jr. Commission has formed several viable partnerships with law enforcement agencies across the state who have served at several events in the past. We have worked hand in hand with these agencies to spark community dialogue and build relationships throughout the state. However, the recent events surrounding the death of George Floyd has damaged the community's confidence in our law enforcement and our justice system. As a result, many of our races, all ages, all backgrounds in cities across the United States have taken it to the streets to express their frustration. This again hurts our community. I understand your pain. I understand your anguish. As an African American male, I too have children. I would be devastated if anything tragically happened to them, but violence is not the answer. During the most turbulent times in American history, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. encouraged citizens to mobilize, to organize, and to effectuate change through peaceful protests in the face of real and present danger. In order to usher in serenity and peace, and for the sake of public safety, we can best honor Dr. King by refraining from any chaos or any violent actions during this time. Violence, again, guys, is a destruction that takes away from the message and the passion of your movement. It provides an avenue for agitators to sabotage your message. Please do not give any place for these people to come in and share your message and destroy that movement through violence. In closing, I'll leave you with the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness can drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate can't drive out hate. Only love. I say again, only love can do that. Remember, you have a right to assemble, but please do so peacefully.
Thank you, Deshaun, and I'll second the encouragement for peaceful actions tonight as we continue to go through this. Let's take two more questions. Yes.
So, is there anything you can do beyond protecting people to create calm again? Is there anything you can do to say to people, is there any action you can do to make it come to a halt, make people feel
I think that's a very good question. As you go through the outrage, the distress, the angst, the fear, and the distrust, you've got to somehow get to a kernel of what action can we take? How do we do better? How do we prevent this from what we saw in Minneapolis happening anywhere again? And we know we're going to have issues again, but we've got to take action and steps. And so I'm a concrete guy, and I hope we can get to that point to figure out action steps. So I think it starts with communication and dialogue and understanding of the challenges and trying to address them head on.
On this? Are you going to lead a peaceful protest and ask some of these people who are hurting to come speak so you can hear what they propose in terms of solutions, or a task force?
I just say I'm doing a lot of communication right now, and I'll leave it at that. If we do more, we'll communicate that, but we're having a lot of communication, listening to people, and I think that's an important step. I don't think anybody needs to hear solutions from me right now. I think they need to be listened to.
I want to hear a solution, sir, but would they hear some comfort from you? I was just thinking of one of your predecessors who was on the Capitol steps a half century ago after Dr. King's death.
He's an incredible model, role model for leadership. I recognize that, and certainly there's a time and a place for that. And so let's see how this develops and what's needed. I hope that words are helpful. And the fact that I've said I've made a statement about this and expressed my personal feelings about this is of some relief to people, that they at least know that the leaders understand their concerns and what they're demonstrating about. One final question. I think yes, Frank.
There's been reports that the president told you in this phone call today that you have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. Is he right about that? How important is domination?
Well, if you're speaking of a military operation, sure, you always want to have a higher level of forces. That's the Powell doctrine. We're not talking about military exercises here. We're talking about civilian law enforcement, and that's what, and from an Arkansas perspective, we're trying to carry out. We have utilized the state activation of the National Guard under state control. That gives us the assistance that we need to meet the challenge, and that's the way we're taking it. Thank you all very much.
Us here on THV 11, you were just listening in to Governor Asa Hutchinson as he addressed the unrest that has followed the death of George Floyd out of Minneapolis. Governor Hutchinson said he is outraged and disappointed at law enforcement that continues to cross the line time and time again after swearing to protect and serve. He also said that he understands and he respects peaceful protesting. He said he has two jobs. He wants to make sure that those protesters are protected, and he also is here to ensure there is no destruction or violence. Now, you know, from reporting here at THV 11, we have seen over the past few days some vandalism, people breaking into government buildings, and fires being set to various buildings across central Arkansas. 2 days ago, Governor Hutchinson said that he activated the Arkansas National Guard. It was not until the vandalism happened at the Capitol that he decided to move the Arkansas National Guard a little closer to keep peaceful protesters safe. Governor Hutchinson also said that we're seeing three different types of protesters. We're seeing the peaceful protesters who are doing what their First Amendment right allows them to do. We're also seeing people taking advantage of the situation and doing things like looting, setting fires, breaking into buildings. And the third type are people from out of state who are coming here to wreak havoc and looking to cause trouble. Now, he said that the Arkansas National Guard will continue to be used as a backup role for the time being. He again said that he supports the 10 p.m. curfew that was set into effect by Mayor Frank Scott Jr. here in Little Rock. That goes into effect tonight. And he does not want to undermine the message that is being shared by peaceful protesters and what they are trying to get across. We have team coverage for you tonight. You can expect to see various reporters posted throughout Central Arkansas this evening, beginning at 5 o'clock here on THV 11 for team coverage. We hope that you'll join us then.